Dying well is a dying art. Dying well is a dying art. How many of you have ever heard of a book or a genre of literature called the Ars Moriendi? Raise your hands if you have. No? Ars Moriendi is Latin for the art of dying. Written in the 15th century in the shadow of the Black Death, the Ars Moriendi was a handbook for how to die well. Now, long before the Ars Moriendi, ancient philosophers, artists, poets, and theologians were taken by the subject of dying well. And long after the Ars Moriendi, the subject of dying well remained alive. It's only recently that candid conversations about how to die well have all but disappeared in our culture. Why have we gone mute in the face of death? Well, for one thing, we have medicalized death. We have taken death out of the home and into the hospitals. But hospitals are for sick people seeking a cure. So we've gotten ourselves into this strange predicament where there are no longer any dying people. There are only sick people. Sick people who may just respond to one more medical intervention. But I'm not here to talk about sick people getting cured. I'm here to talk about living people dying well. Now, there are better and worse ways to start this conversation. My 7-year-old daughter, when she was 7 years old, we were sitting in church, and I was here, she was sitting here, and my best friend was sitting on the other side of her. Ann Morton was playing the piano, and she launched into a rendition of one of my very favorite hymns, Lamb of God. I was enraptured. In my enthusiasm, I leaned over to my daughter, and I said, I want this song at my funeral. Her eyes got huge as she burst into tears. My best friend glared at me over the top of her head. She put her arms around Chloe, drew her close, and said, Chloe, you're going to have to forgive your mother. Because out of the billions of people on this planet right now, she's one of the very few writing a book on death. So I trust that you will find your own way, maybe a better way, to strike up this conversation. So why am I so passionate about this subject? Well, back when I was in seminary in my early 20s, I did my internship at Connecticut Hospice in Branford, Connecticut, the first hospice in the United States. I stayed on as I finished my doctoral work. Early on, I came across a quote that has stuck with me ever since, and it goes like this: we are not the living ministering to the dying. We are the living who will die, ministering to the living who may die sooner. So I went on to get my doctorate and get ordained as an American Baptist minister, and then I became a seminary professor myself. So now I regularly teach a class called Evil, Suffering, Death, and Afterlife, affectionately known around campus as the Evil course. I've written a book and articles on this. I talk out in the community. And in all of this, I really have 3 primary goals. 1, I want to prepare us all to die well. 2, I want to make us useful companions to those who are journeying towards death. And 3, I really want all of us to just stop saying stupid stuff about suffering and dying. Now, those are really 3 different talks, related but different. So today, I really just want to focus on the first one, because it turns out that in preparing to die well, we may learn how to live well. I've seen people die well, and I've seen people die poorly. And maybe you have too. Now, no two people are exactly alike, but there tends to be a certain shape to the living and dying of those we might see as examples. We might think of these as markers or virtues. So let me highlight just a few of those, and you can let me know how these mesh with your own experience. Honesty comes first. No one is well served by pretending that someone is not dying. Families are reluctant to talk about it because they're afraid they might depress the person who's dying or make them give up hope. For their part, the dying person tries to protect the family. They try to rally and keep their chin up so as to not distress the family. But this farce serves no one. All it does is waste precious time and energy that could be used to make those remaining days rich and meaningful. But if we have not cultivated the habit of having honest conversations about life's most daunting experiences, we're unlikely to start when death shows up. When we can have these honest conversations, we may find ourselves enriched, maybe even walking on holy ground. This is the experience I had in my last phone conversation with a friend of mine. He was the bishop in residence when I first arrived at SMU 14 years ago. He was nearing death after a long illness, and by then he was back in Indiana. So our phone conversation started in its usual way. So, what are you reading these days? We explored ideas. We swapped stories. He gave me some good, if challenging, advice. We laughed. And then he shared a story with me about helping his young grandson prepare for his impending death. A story that ended with this big, burly man who had grown up working on the railroads, now bedridden, embracing his young grandson as his grandson sobbed, saying over and over, "Oh, granddaddy, oh, granddaddy." I told my friend that I was feeling the same way, that I was just really deeply sad about the fact that very soon I would no longer be able to pick up that phone and have a chat. I wouldn't look at my email and see something from him, an email from him introducing me to some new poet. And there was more to the conversation. I will always treasure that conversation, but we were only able to have it because we had established a habit of honest conversation for years before that. Now, hear this. I have no interest in glorifying or sugarcoating death. Dying can be messy, painful, smelly, even embarrassing work. So can living. And even the best deaths are marked by sadness and grief, as is the best life. But the best deaths are also marked by hope. I have watched people die grounded in hope. These are people who were somehow able to see their story in the context of the larger narrative of the human story. They lived with intention, committed to certain core values. Their living and their dying were imbued with meaning. This does not happen by accident. It only comes from practice. Now, it's a great thing to discern our core values and to try to live into those. But inevitably, we will stumble. We will hurt other people. This is where forgiveness and reconciliation come in. People who die well know how to seek forgiveness, and they know how to grant it. Do we? And the same goes for gratitude. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but it turns out that you can remain grateful even while you're dying. This took me by surprise as a young intern, and honestly, it still impresses me when I see it today. There's a temptation to complain life into 1,000 little bits. Pettiness creeps in. I remember visiting with Mrs. Robinson one day during her stay at hospice, and we got to talking about family, and I was telling her I wish this certain family member would call me. I found it frustrating that it seemed like I was always the one having to initiate the call, that if I didn't call, the conversation wouldn't happen. So I was just going to wait and see how long it was going to take this person this time until they called me. So she listened attentively to all this blathering. And when I finished, she looked at me and said, "So do you want to talk to so-and-so?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course. Why do you think I'm so bent out of shape about it?" She said, "So call her." People who die well live fully in the present, no matter how fleeting that present may be. Is life perfect? No. Is it good? Absolutely. So live it, and live it now. Enjoy the sensual pleasures, the sun on your face, the taste of a juicy peach in your mouth, the touch of a lover's hand. It's all gift. People who die well are generous and generative. They leave some kind of legacy. Even in their dying, they're creating and teaching and mentoring, blessing, giving of themselves for the sake of others. Now, how many of y'all know William Sloane Coffin? So William Sloane Coffin was a political activist, and he was the pastor of Riverside Church in New York City, and he's always been one of my heroes. As luck would have it, we shared an editor, Stephanie Egnatovich. Now, Coffin had also been ill for a really long time, and he was nearing death. In the course of a conversation with Stephanie, I was telling her how much Coffin has always meant to me and how wonderful it would be to have a conversation with him before he died. She said to me, "Well, I'm actually going to be talking to him later this afternoon. Why don't I see if I can set up a conversation?" I was stunned. Long story short, 2 days later, indeed, I was having a conversation with William Sloane Coffin. He generously engaged me in a rather lengthy conversation. Now, who does that? He had every right to just turn inward. Who lets a brand new person into their life 2 weeks before they die? He died 2 weeks after that conversation. Who does that? Well, people who have always lived like that, opened outward. So finally, those who die well die connected. They testify to love in life and in death. It's December 18th, 2005. My father-in-law is living his last fully conscious day of his life. There he sits in the recliner, a choir member robbed of his voice by lung cancer. He breathes only with the help of an oxygen tank. He gives his full attention to his 8-year-old granddaughter, the only one to have inherited his gift of singing. She's just finished 4 full performances of Godspell. She starred in the song "We Beseech Thee." And believe you me, I had heard this song numerous times that fall. But believe you me, I had never really heard that song until I watched as my daughter stood in front of her dying grandfather and sang these words: "Grant us all from earth to rise, and to strain with eager eyes toward the promised heavenly prize. We beseech thee, hear us. Come, sing about love. 12 hours later, he lay unconscious, and that's the way he would remain until his death, with one exception. Late Tuesday afternoon, he woke up for about 45 minutes. My enduring image is watching my children bid him farewell. My 5-year-old son climbing up on a chair in order to be close enough to be seen and heard. My daughter saying, "Goodbye, Grandpa. We'll miss you." Honesty, hope, forgiveness, gratitude, legacy, connection. Let's keep talking about dying well. We may find clues to living well while we're at it.